Hi. So today we're going to be talking about activism in Nepal, and I'm going to be talking to Dr. Pragati Gimire. So first off, it would be great if you could please introduce yourself and just tell us about your background, your interests, your activities, and so forth.
Thank you so much, Prashamsha Ghimire, for having me on your program. So my name is Pragati Ghimire, and I'm originally from Nepal. I have a background in medicine, but I came to the United States to pursue master's in public health. Because when I was working in Nepal, I saw that we had a very basic healthcare infrastructure, and the quality of healthcare was not so great. So I wanted to do study public health so that we can have a bigger impact on the larger population. So I came here, and then after finishing my degree in public health, I started working in epidemiology because I really like to use the data to understand people at a population level so that we can make a bigger difference. Like if we could identify where some service is needed or where something is happening. If having a bird's eye kind of view was really interesting using data to do that. So I worked mostly in that area. And after working as an epidemiologist for many years, first at Harvard Medical School and then as consultant epidemiologist, I decided to work as a health policy expert by using big data. In the last 20 years, we have a humongous amount of data that's available to study. So I was really, really interested in looking at that data and how that can be used in making policies and policy recommendations. So that's what I've been doing. And at the same time, in public health, we started to talk about social determinants of health. So we started to see that, yes, people need better health care or better access to care. But if we did not understand their social backgrounds, their social environment, their history, even their age, their race, their ethnicities, if all those things are not incorporated, we cannot provide good health care, that a continuum of healthcare. So that's what we found, and we started to incorporate those issues also in our research, in our evidence, in our policies. And that's why I got more and more interested into how social factors affect someone's well-being, not only healthcare, but also their physical and their emotional well-being. And that's also when it started to touch me, like how, because before, as a medical doctor and as a public health professional, I did not really understand very well. I just used the data to study this and that. But once we use the social data, it made even more sense. So that's when I started um, to be really, really interested in how these things affect individuals at individual level too, and how we can improve society. We can bring more peace, or we can talk about humanity, those kind of issues. And we cannot do that. We cannot achieve peace or equity um, until we look into everything. So
I
that's how
agree.
I got interested in everything, I guess.
Definitely. And I think that public health and women's rights goes hand in hand. So if you don't mind, just bring or talking about like a quick summary of how women's health kind of relates to public health and what you do, if you don't mind.
Right, right. Of course, like let's say even let's talk about the context in Nepal, right? So in the context of Nepal, which is a developing country, one of the poorest in the world. So when a lot of women who are in the remote areas, for example, they don't even have access to prenatal care, or they don't sometimes they don't even have access to, because they live in so far remote areas and there's no road, like paved roads. So um, they have difficulties reaching hospitals on time for delivery. So that's how sad it is, as a woman living in this world in the 21st century, people don't have access to a healthcare facility nearby to give birth. So yeah, and you can imagine there's no, so by that you can imagine there's no good schools or even schools around. So, and the women have to do really hard work, maybe not even water available nearby, they have to carry water. So those are the things that are happening in many parts of the world.
Definitely. And I think one of the issues that we can still see in Nepal is just like the menstruation like restrictions. That's like still a large issue. Can you explain that a little bit, or like the mindset that goes around all of that kind of?
This is the menstruation.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, so in Nepal and I think in other parts of Asia too, um, there is a during menstruation, a lot of the societies still observe something called untouchability period. So we call it untouchability period, and girls or women who are menstruating, they are not supposed to, let's say, touch certain things or even enter certain places, enter the kitchens, or in the far western part of Nepal, for example, they are not even allowed to stay inside the main home. So they have to spend their nights mm, in a shed, like in a shed, which can be very dangerous because often they don't even have doors. So you can imagine girls as young as 11 or 12 just being in a shed by themselves. We've had stories, events where girls have been bitten by snakes or some other uh, things happening, like assault, sexual assault kind of uh, things happen to little girls. So it's yeah, so that's very, very difficult period for girls, and we cannot even imagine how for they have to do it 3 or 4 days a month. So it's almost 40 or 50 days in a year that the girls have to spend like that. So it's
Definitely,
very
yeah. And
sad.
I think probably you had to like deal with it when you were younger, and then even me, I think like as the generation like progresses, I think a lot of us have become more open-minded about things like that. But I think it's definitely hard to, like, you can see it in the household kind of thing where if a parent, if like your mom is on her period or something like that, then the household, like, she kind of, there's this thing if, like, if your grandma's over, she has to kind of like not step into the kitchen, like my mom wouldn't be able to step into the kitchen or something like that. So it like really does affect like everyday kind of life, and just like it's a lot of, I think, a lot to do with I think in older generations, more of like religious kind of background and stuff. But I do think it's definitely developing in people's mindset. So I really like that we are kind of growing forward from all of that as well. And also, I wanted to just talk about, so you were talking about sexual assault as well. So we can kind of dive deeper into that. So first off, I'd like to talk about like the Nirmala Panta case, and that definitely stirred a lot of frustration and protests across Nepal. So can you explain why this was the case, and why these types of movements are really important?
Yeah, so definitely. So this was a case that happened in the western part of Nepal. A young girl was found dead, and then upon investigation, it was found that she was also raped and strangled. So there was a big uproar and a lot of protest already starting. And from the beginning, the investigations was not going on properly, and there was also there were a lot of going back and forth between the victims' family and the police personnel who were involved in the investigation, and they they were also talk about even the police personnel's relatives being involved in the case because the DNA was damaged, the evidence was damaged, and then someone was someone said that they had committed the crime, and then upon investigation, that person did not commit the crime. So there, there was a lot of uproar, and they were protests because people thought that the police personnel themselves were somehow involved in hiding the evidence. So that's why the protest grew and grew for a long time. And also because they could not catch the culprits. So yeah, the case is still going on because they still have not found who committed the crime. So from time to time there will be, so every time there is another case of rape and murder, this case comes up, but yeah, we still don't have any evidence now, or they have not caught the perpetrator. And also, I think this, I don't know if you recently heard about this actor who was involved in a similar case with a singer, with a minor.
Yeah.
So, so what happened is, what's going on, and what happened right after that event is, when the actor was caught, is a lot of feminists were really not protest, or I mean not voicing their concern because the actor was very popular, or so there was a concern that feminists also oftentimes, or rights activists, they get involved when, for cases that they are interested, and not for cases that they I mean, they will judge that, okay, this guy couldn't commit this kind of crime, or they will be biased, you know. So there has been a lot of recently there has been a lot of uproar about that too, why some rights activists and some feminists are cherry picking the cases and protesting against some cases and not protesting against some other cases. And there's also some political reasons as well. So yeah, so
Definitely. I think also the whole Paul Shaw case, it was really, I guess, in a sense, unique because so many people were on the two different sides of the whole thing. And it was interesting to kind of see where people stood whenever it was a celebrity involved and they have so much privilege. And I think one of the main things was that people were not paying attention to, like, they were like, oh, but you know, the girl was like, you know, she wanted to like be his boyfriend or something like that. But that didn't justify, you know, what they were saying, because at the end of the day, whenever you look back into the Constitution, it was, she was a minor, and people weren't, you know, people were still trying to defend him, it seems like,
yes.
even though he was doing so much harm. So that was really unfortunate. And I think that like that case really showed that in terms of like society, people do kind of nitpick. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
something to pay attention.
Yeah, so people like us who really understand the law and also understand what minor is, we knew who was wrong, right? But there were a lot of people in the media and people who were very famous activists also were taking sides and were or not taking, or were not supporting the victim. So it has caused a lot of uproar, but also it gave us a view of where our society is actually, because um, I mean, we cannot be biased when we have cases like this. We have, you know, the law, we have to close our eyes, and we have to, it doesn't matter if it's a very famous actor or just someone from the village, the law has to be the law, right? But people are just, because it's a very famous celebrity from a certain family background or certain caste, that you think this person automatically is not guilty. But then if it's someone from a certain other caste or other areas or other family background, then they are guilty. So this kind of prejudices also have to be slowly, I think, slowly understood, and people really we need to educate people, because yeah, so this kind of law, people have to understand the law, and it's the law that's very important, and what is really a minor, and that has to be understood as well. Not that she wanted him to be his boyfriend is not even a
Yeah.
question, because you know, we talk about how older men can, or even women, I mean older people can groom younger people into believing they are in a relationship. But
Yeah.
yeah, so those are the things that are not still understood in countries like Nepal.
Exactly. And also, whenever talking about Nirmala Panta case and other cases like that, do you think activism has grown a lot in Nepal after these types of? I definitely think, in my opinion, I think I've seen a lot more protests going on in the media at least, and I think a lot of it has been for a good cause. I think for especially with the Nirmala Panta case. So do you think activism is rising a lot in Nepal,
Mhm.
and how is that
Yeah.
affecting everything? And I also think the younger generation is also becoming a lot more, prone to like helping out than I've seen before. So I think that's also good. So if you could talk about that.
Yeah, definitely. That's also something I wanted to touch upon. Like, during the pandemic, I worked with a group of young people, volunteers who were working in the relief and rescue missions in Nepal. And I worked with such a wonderful team of very young people, very passionate people. So we decided to continue that work as a long term in as a non-profit organization. And a lot of work we do is around youth empowerment and women empowerment, that kind of areas. So I have come across very young and passionate women who have been working in these areas, like whether it's doing flash mob to against gender violence, or doing protests in the street, but doing it very, very effectively now, and also shaming the older generation of feminists into being biased like that. They just come out and talk about you need to be fair, and so yeah, this young generation activists, I really love working with them. And yeah, I've worked with a couple of them in the last 2 years. So I think we're definitely going in the right direction, but we need to educate people in the villages. So like right now, the young women in the cities, they are very much aware, and they know how to fight for these right issues for other women, but we need to reach more areas.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, young girls and women are able to speak,
Mhm.
their minds a lot more than, it was prevalent in the past. And
Yeah.
also moving on to, I guess we can talk about, how are women in Nepal given, do you think the same opportunities as men in the workplace or positions of power, such as politics? What's your take on that?
So since we're talking about politics, let's just talk about what's happening right now in Nepal. We have local elections right now, and a very famous person is running for the mayor of Kathmandu. He was also a mayor previously 25 years ago. And there's a woman now who is claiming that, who's claiming a Me Too event, Me Too kind of incident happened to her at the hands of the person running for mayor. But being Nepal, people are very much politically biased. So one group of people are calling out for him to not for, I mean, calling out for him to just address this issue, whereas the other half of the city is saying that it's just a regular political season, and blaming the the opponent. So yeah, this is happening right now in Nepal. And yeah, I think often women have to experience certain scenarios where they have to I mean, it's they don't even dare to express what's going on, because your job is at stake. So, and it's expected for men that women uh, will do what you say, or they will fear backlash, or even fear shame if they talk about it. So even just I was
You're kind of
talking to some
expected
women.
to be submissive, I
Mhm.
guess, right?
Yeah. So because if they are not, then I mean, even their family will. They cannot even talk to their family about it. So it's very, very rare for women to go back to their families and talk about it. So I think a lot of them are taken advantage. These days we see people writing anonymously about things happening to them, but very few really come out in front and talk about this.
Yeah, and definitely in my English class as well, we talked about this a lot and how, shame takes such a big part into it. And I think you can tie back shame into all
Yeah,
of that because women feel so much shame about speaking out. Like
yeah,
they're seen as kind of like, not as, they're not given the same kind of view as men. They're seen as like a little below them or, inferior to them. So I think that definitely
yeah.
does affect women and how much they are able to say.
One more thing I would like to add is, usually it's also like when you women talk to men as friend or become friendly, they take it as a lot of men take it as flirting, because there is this kind of separation between men and women, and they don't usually join in on conversations. But if some women feel comfortable, they feel comfortable talking about issues with, having conversations with both genders. But men will take it as a flirting or wanting to have some kind of relationship. So I've had in the last few weeks, I've had people tell me about that. Like if I'm too friendly, they think I'm flirting, and if I'm not being friendly, then they don't help me. So that
That
kind of scenarios happen too. That's very
exactly,
sad for women. Like they're taken as objects, you know.
exactly, yeah. Um, and then also, yeah, talking more about I guess positions and of power. Do you think women are, as we talked about in politics and things like that, or even the workplace, do you think women are looked down upon in terms of, power, like holding power, such as, being, like bosses or, politics? Do you think that, we can see a lot of women in that field, or is there still not that type of, I guess you could say, development in terms of
Yeah, it's a very rare to see women in power. We have a president who is a woman, but again, she is the wife of a very famous politician. So there's also question about whether she had been given that position because of her capabilities or because of her connections. But again, yeah, we have very few women reach a certain positions either in business or in politics. But again, it's also very hard for women to climb up the ladder, because once they get married, usually they're expected to stay home and have take care of the house, the children. And some of them, when they do it, there's always you always need your own group or your own circle. But so there's very smaller circle for women, very very small number of role models, so, and people you can talk to or people you can learn from. So in that way, even in politics or in business, there's very few women. But in the media, we see quite a bit of women in the mid-level media, but we have yet to see how they their thinking is, because they have all grown in the patriarchal society. So I don't know how comfortable they are talking about women's issues or women rights without stepping on the patriarchal boundaries, you know.
And you're talking about like patriarchal kind of customs and society kind of. So going into just like patriarchal customs, we can talk about kind of like the suffering of women like throughout history, and we can see that in Nepal too. I guess one of the things we can talk about was the practice of what we called sati. And can you just explain what sati was and just like its consequences on women? I think a lot of people don't know about it outside of, especially here in the US. So if you could talk about that kind of.
Okay. Yeah, so sati uh, was something that women had to go. So let's say when their husband died, they had to accompany him through death, right, to be a companion. So often in history, in the past times, the men had multiple wives. So either it was the first wife or the wife who loved him the most, who would go to death, to the funeral pyre and burn together. After the husband died, they had to die together. So that was something that was the that custom was stopped some many like maybe almost century ago. But still, what's going on is after the husband's death, women are not supposed to wear certain colors and wear certain jewelries. So usually the married women in Nepal have to wear a nose ring. So they have to take off that nose ring, and they are not allowed to wear red clothes, which and red vermilion or red bangles, which are symbols of marriage. So anything that's associated with marriage and any customs that are associated with marriage, they have to stop practicing those. So in a way, it's still something that's painful to remind them that they are a widow, and the society knows that. I mean, even people who don't know you, they know by the attire that someone is a widow. And oftentimes, if they are younger women, they were also at risk of being taken advantage of, because I mean, it's really hard for women to tell publicly what happened to them. Then it's much even worse for widows to explain what's going on with them. So yeah, so still a lot of these old practices and customs still
And
are
I
going on, but it's not
think
as common as before, but still it's expected in some situations, in some societies.
And I think that also goes back to show kind of this kind of hierarchy of men. Of course, we all mourn when somebody dies, but the fact that women kind of have to like show it, they can't wear some things or
Yeah.
like wear a certain color. Whereas like I don't think it's the same way for a man, right? If like a woman, their wife dies, they're not expected
Yeah.
they're expected to kind of just like move on with their life or
Yes.
something of that sort. Whereas women like are kind of shackled down into even after their husband has died, they're still, kind of seen to be, having to like, I guess I don't say worship, but holding on to that, and it's not the same
Yes.
standard.
Yes, they are supposed to remember them and not forget them, and that is done by mourn them by the clothes they wear. Whereas the men, they are encouraged actually to move on, to remarry again. In many cases, if the wife had sisters who were not married, they would expect the wife's sister to marry with the man, so that the family would be somewhat intact. So those
Yeah.
kind of expectations on women. So you have a woman who is expected to marry with your dead sister's husband. So
Yeah.
those kind of expectations from women, sacrifices from women, it still happens, but it's less common now. Yeah, but it's still.
Yeah, and I think also in terms of sati, there's this movie called Zola, and I think also you could see there the whole thing where it was where kind of he was pretty old, the man, and he had married somebody like a girl who was very young. So the old man who was already kind of dying of old age,
Yeah.
it left this girl who was just starting her life, like she had to, she was expected to die for her husband. So it was just so, I guess, so sad, and like to see that women were taken, so advantage of from like so long ago, and how that
Yeah.
continues. But moving on, are there any other like, can you explain any other present issues occurring in Nepal related to women's rights? I know you talked about, uh, I think his name is Balan Shah, and how he's running for mayor. Are there any other situations related to women's rights that you can talk about, or anything you've participated in, any like protests you participated in, maybe relating to women's rights or any activism in general?
Yeah, so since I've not been to Nepal during the pandemic, we've done a lot of virtual protest. One was we have a medical doctor, a protest for accessible and quality healthcare for our Nepalis. So he protest against the private health institutions who charge a huge amount of fees, and they also only they charge a lot of they charge huge fees for medical education as well. So a lot of people from a poorer background are not able to afford it. So we support I personally and our organization have supported those protests that he does. And he was actually here in New York protesting for world peace in New York a couple of months ago. And we also protested for farmers' rights, because oftentimes farmers are taken advantage of in Nepal and also in other countries like India too. So this we were specifically supporting sugarcane farmers, because these farmers were producing sugarcane, but the sugaring industry was not paying them. So we were supporting that, and we were also supporting women rights activism that was going on, the flash mobs and all other activisms that were going on. We were supporting virtually, because these days it's easy. We have some activists who will come on live and also share with us the protest. So we who are in the diaspora are able to join in virtually. So it has made the world very small, and also it helps them for their cause, because we have because they have global support, global support of Nepalis. So it also helps their cause. So we try to participate as much as possible.
And I think there are a couple of organizations like you're a part of, and I think even I think there was one that you created. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I'm not sure. I think you even would do podcasts or like video interviews like these. So if you could talk about that as well.
Yes, so right after the pandemic, we started this talk programs about young women doing amazing work in Nepal. So we would highlight every month. We would highlight young women who were doing work in the communities. So we did talk programs on that, and we also. Right now we are doing talk programs on youth in politics, why it's important for youth to be in politics. Nepal is also one of the most corrupt countries in Asia. So we are trying to raise awareness on accountability and good governance. So a lot of youth are now interested in politics, and we try to encourage that. So we do talk programs in that area as well. And we also are supporting public health programs in Nepal, and we are going to also launch some health campaigns like yoga and meditation and this kind of programs in elementary school, because we believe that healthy lifestyle should start very young. So because chronic it's the healthcare problems are, we are at a very unique situation now in Nepal and in many developing countries, because the chronic health diseases are catching on, but also the preventable diseases, we have still not gotten rid of all the infectious diseases. So there's a double burden, the burden of infectious disease and chronic disease. So we want to control chronic disease as well before they become an epidemic in Nepal, like diabetes and high blood pressure. They are starting to become really big problem in the population. So we want to stop that in the next generation.
I love that. You definitely do a lot, to help out in Nepal and everything with your activism. So I'm sure everyone really appreciates that. And so, I think that's the majority of the questions. So is there anything else you'd like to kind of tell the audience here, or, in order to, be more of like an activist or have an activist type of mindset, what you can do to make an impact, not only in Nepal, but I guess like anywhere, I think it starts with small steps. So do you have any words of advice?
Yeah, so I think first find something that you're passionate about, an area that you're passionate about, and these days with social media, it's easy because you can find groups that are already doing work in what you are interested. So you could find those kind of groups. And even for me, for example, a lot of work I do is virtual now, and we have teams in Nepal. I work with people I've never met, and those are really the most passionate people I have ever met in my life. So I have a lot of experience, but the work I'm doing now, I find is very meaningful because it helps to inspire young women, and they also like to work with someone who's not in Nepal, who's in the United States, who's gotten a lot of I mean, they will think it's a quality education and experience, but what I find is I learn so much from them because they risk their lives working in the community. Like even during the pandemic, I was here in the room, but they were in the community risking their lives with very little protection. They were doing amazing, meaningful work. So I find it very, very rewarding to be able to work with them, and thank God for this technology. So yeah.
Yeah, that's so admirable. But I think that's kind of all the questions that I had. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk to me. And hopefully everyone who listens to this, it helps them or just helps them have more of an activist type of mindset. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be part of this podcast.